Hi, Michael, and welcome to Defying Gravity.
Hi, Helen. Great to meet you.
Awesome. Look, I know you're now in some really amazing non-executive roles in some of the iconic Australian companies like Seven West Media and so on. But in this conversation, obviously, we're talking to people who have scaled companies really successfully and just hearing some of your lessons. So I'd love to take you back to a very iconic company you built from, I think, a garage in Perth in 1993.
Every startup needs a garage. Yeah.
Awesome. iiNet, that you exited 20 years later. So a hell of a scale-up journey I'm dying to talk to you about. So welcome. Can you give us the sort of overview of why iiNet, the journey you took, the size it was when you left? Tell us a little bit of your story.
Well, the startup wasn't that complicated. I was leaving university, and at the time there were no internet service providers in Western Australia. So I become quite attached to my internet connection through the university,
Yeah.
and I looked around to try and find what would it cost me to get my own private link. It was about $25,000 a year for a 14K link to the
Wow.
US. And I couldn't afford that on a maths teacher's salary. So I asked a few other uni students, hey, if I did this, would you chip in? I guess that was my market research. And then I worked out, well, if I could get 200 people paying $25 a month, that would cover my internet costs. So that was my entire business plan. And with that and a whole lot of ignorance about what would it actually require, then I started the business. But yeah, just as son number 3 had moved out of home, son number 1 moved back into my parents' home, into the garage, and set up there because I was in rental and we wouldn't have been able to install phone lines, lots of phone lines into a rental. So by the time I left my parents' place a couple of years later, we had 350 phone lines going to their home address in Padbury in the northern suburbs of Perth.
Oh,
And
that's an amazing story.
yes, so they were, we still kept the location up there because of call zone issues. And many years later, we would say, we've had a problem with our Padbury point of presence, and our on-site technician is looking into it. And that was my mum. We'd be walking her through it over the telephone, put this cable in there, move that one across there. And so
Oh,
so
God.
the journey after that, though, I mean, it grew so fast. That first year, it was very technical. It really was only university level people or people that had a really specific requirement, because it's very technical. It was the black command line. You needed to know your way around Unix.
Yes.
And, and there was no web interface or even Windows available for at the time for the internet.
Yes.
So it was about a year later after we started that Netscape was released in
Yep.
late 94. And that kind of changed everything. That was the first worldwide web browser for Windows. And
Yep.
so it took us a year to get the 200 customers. Then we put on another 1,000 customers in the next 3 months. And after that, it was just trying to hang on for dear life. So it was very much demand driven. And
Yes.
Telstra and Optus and Microsoft at the time didn't think the internet was going to be a thing. That the expectation was it was going to be private networks, which, in hindsight now looks silly. But at the time, this was very much what the expectation was. So America Online, Microsoft Network, there was a lot of those sorts of private walled gardens.
Yes.
The internet was chaos. So
Yes.
in Australia, it was very much just a hobbyist network. And Telstra and Optus they thought we were fun because we bought lots of phone lines off them, but that wasn't an area they wanted to get into themselves.
Yeah.
Telstra entered in 97, Optus in 98, into the retail area. And so iiNet was allowed, I think, to be able to grow. There was 1,000 independent ISPs around that time in Australia. So
Wow.
more per capita than any other country that I'm aware of, certainly more than the US. And iiNet, that allowed iiNet, the dot-com boom was happening in the late 90s.
Yeah.
But a lot of Australia's institutions, under their mandates, they weren't able to invest in companies that had no revenue, certainly no profit. And iiNet came along and it looked a lot like a dot-com, it was an internet thing. And
Yes.
it was actually, we were projecting for FY 2000 about 19 million of revenue and actual bottom line profit and cash flow positive. So we were very fortunate, that for a company our size, market cap 38 mil after the listing, that was, very micro cap, but we ended up with 80% of the register was, blue chip institutional investors, which proved very handy when we needed to grow later on.
Yeah.
And then,
Amazing.
as you say, then I continued on for 21 years, left in 2014, so 10 years ago now. And the company a couple of years later was bought out by TPG for a total of about 1.7 billion when it exited. So when I left, we had 3,500 staff, over $1 billion of revenue, and over 1 million households and small businesses across Australia connected. So it was a hell of a journey.
Epic journey. Honestly, it's got to be one of the big ones. So you were a maths teacher, not even planning to be an entrepreneur. How on earth did you grow yourself to be managing over 3,000 people? Tell me about that.
I think I had tried to start up a couple of other businesses beforehand.
Right.
So,
Oh, you were interested. Yeah.
grew up in my parents were self-employed. Both my brothers have ended up self-employed. So I think that was something we were always going to do. But my parents ran their business out of home as well, putting up fences in Perth's northern suburbs. So I kind of grew up in that environment from when I was 8, 9 years old. We spent after school and weekends, we worked with them. The phones rang, people came over and paid their bills. I think we kind of absorbed all that without even realizing about all the things this required.
Yeah.
For an example of that for me was 24/7 support. I never even thought about it. It was just, of course, I sleep next to the bed. I sleep next to the phone. Of course, I'm going to answer the phone. And so it was a differentiator from day one, 24/7 support. And if it wasn't there, I was wearing a pager, which was just, doctors, drug dealers, and me at the time. But it allowed us to be able to help people out all the time. And I think that was a big differentiator for us. But it was the growth after that. I mean, my parents gave me half the capital, and honestly, they had no idea what this was about. This was very much that, if you want to give this a go, we'll back you. And but they didn't understand the business model or what was going on, and they just thought, we'll give you a hand though.
Yeah, incredible. So, but that was an amazing growth journey, obviously moving out and presumably getting office space at some point. It was those days. And really starting to hire in volume, no doubt, to keep 24/7 as you went to 1 million customers and beyond. Tell me about how you changed and grew with that business, because that's a very big CEO role suddenly you're in within, probably.
That hiring question is probably one of the very early things. I think like most early managers, we made the mistake of trying to hire people like us. So there was a case of here, I've got too much work to do, so I need another me to do this job. And hiring people that had all the same faults as me, which was, I don't want to do that job. That was, I think, an initial problem. One of our early staff members, Glenn, who I'm still in contact with, actually, he was doing his IT degree, IT and psychology, but he was working part-time in hospitality, and made that point. Look, you keep on hiring programmers, and they don't want to deal with tech support, which is 80% of the job. They want to program. So, but if you hire people from hospitality and tourism, we're paying double what they were getting paid working odd shifts in the hotels, and there's an opportunity to learn. So that was for us a very pivotal decision in hindsight. So we started doing that. I was a maths teacher, as I mentioned, so we became a registered training organisation, which means we took people with no technical knowledge, but considerable hospitality and tourism experience, and then provided on-site training. So we were able to issue them with Certificate 3, Certificate 4, and eventually diplomas. So it took a lot longer for people to ramp up, but the staff stayed as well. And, iiNet became, a significant employer of choice, I'd like to think. And of course, we kept in contact with all the ex-staff we had a social club called Insanity. So we ended up with this diaspora, I suppose, of former staff that went into other companies and were advocates for us and became future customers, and often came back as well with considerable experience. So we would even talk about that as our outsourced training program. Let someone go and work somewhere else for 3 years, skill up, and then they'd come back to us as a skilled engineer.
Beautiful.
Which was great. But that was a real penny dropping moment, I think, in terms of, you don't want to hire people just like you. In fact, you want to hire into your gaps, and you're identifying those weak areas where other people were significantly better, and hiring into that. Some of the other things were driven by circumstance. I'd like to say it was good planning, but listing on the stock exchange, we didn't have any accountants on staff. There was a large box of receipts. A bookkeeper came in every week or two and tidied up the receipts, and the boxes went off to the accountant once a month. And I do see this a lot with technology companies heading towards listing even today. So we didn't have a budget. The budget was, if there's money in the bank, we'll spend it. And if there's not money in the bank, you don't spend it. And so that again was, the discipline of going to the IPO meant we actually had to get budgets. We had to hire our first chief financial officer, who started after the IPO, funny enough. But that was driven by the demand of just trying to keep up with what was required of the company.
Yeah, yeah. Do you regret doing that listing? Like, that sounds like a hairy one.
I've told a lot of other people coming along, that listing is the most expensive form of debt, and I think I'm sure you'd be aware of that. But find other ways to get cash, even if it's if the banks are unreasonable, still take their cash. Friends, family, fools are always good. Business partners, customers understand your business better. Certainly, I found with the listing in the first few years that I was a bit of a schmuck, actually, in that I was often saying to have this feeling you're talking to investors and planning out my strategy and telling them, and then they would question it. And you're like, you don't even know my business. What are you on about? And then you realize after a while, that's not their problem. That's my problem in terms of communicating it. Investors, particularly in listed companies and the institutions, are very much aligned with your success, of course. They want you to be successful. So if they're questioning the strategy or saying, well, have you thought about this? Then maybe you need to sort of take a deep breath and say, well, either that's a decent question or I'm not communicating things very well if it's not a good question. And I think over time I did learn that, going out to these guys and sort of pitching, here's what we're thinking about doing, what do you reckon, was very valuable. But certainly by the time, in 10 years later, we're $1 billion ASX 100 company, that was taking up probably about a third of my time.
Yes.
And I think I don't think that a lot of people appreciate that. They might say, getting to the markets is just you've got to meet with investors to get their money, and then you don't have to pay attention to them after that.
Yeah.
And that's not the case. You need to keep the investors happy when things are good, because when things are bad, they're going to be a lot more likely then to sort of step in and assist.
Yeah.
Whereas if you ignore them, ignore your board, you ignore your investors during the good times, then you do so at your peril when things turn around.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant.
Turn around. It goes up and down. There is no possibility of things going on forever as just success and growth. There will come bad times.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously real growth mindset you learned from your investors. Who else did you go to kind of keep growing, keep learning as you got a bigger and bigger business? Did you get a coach? Did you use your board? How did you?
I mean, the board was very handy. And so I mentioned we have a mutual friend in Peter James, who was a terrific mentor, friend, and coach on the board. And I think he's relatively rare. Hi, Peter, if you're listening. CEOs, I think, are in an awkward position where if you have significant doubts, then it's difficult to tell that to the staff or the executive team, because, of course, it undermines their confidence. It's difficult to tell it to the board as well, because they've got a statutory duty then to sort of say, well, hang on, if you're worried about this, then we need to take it very seriously. So finding some people where you can actually say, and family often don't understand, as in they're not in that position. So finding some people where you can actually bounce it off them is useful. iiNet was 81% call center staff. So I often said, it's easy to think of this as a networking business. I always thought of it as a service business with a network tacked on. The network was very much the product, but but our interface with customers was through the call centers.
Yes.
And so we required everyone in the company, including me, to do some time in the contact center, at least double jack, but often answering calls or handling emails from customers.
Yeah.
That was very good. Who's the best person to learn what you're doing right and wrong? Your actual customers. So trying to make sure that you're on the front line somehow. I've seen other companies, I mean, certainly when we acquired businesses who often had the same profile as us, but the call center staff were treated as if they were the bottom of the heap. And I think without exception, boards had never visited the contact center. And certainly they were often in another location, and the cool people in marketing or head office rarely ever had any engagement with them. Again, perhaps reflecting that origin from a service background, but with hiring people from hospitality and tourism, we made it so everybody in the company had typically half their at-risk component tied to customer feedback. So even if you're in engineering or in finance, they had a large component attached to customer NPS, Net Promoter Score, which was a feedback score from customers. And you might say, well, what can people in finance do? And they might not be able to do much positive, but they can certainly do a lot negative. Like credit policy is a classic example there, saying, we're going to cut people off after 7 days. That's going to lead, without exceptions, that's going to lead to a lot of very unhappy customers.
Yeah.
So, and engineering, if the network goes down and they're not scrambling to fix it, then that'll lead to unhappy customers.
Yeah.
So certainly finding a way to align it so that everyone in the company was there to say, how do we make customers not just satisfied, but delighted? That we tried to make that permeate every role in the business.
Yeah, beautiful. And look, you with sort of technical and a maths background, there's lots of great skills there for business. But some of the aspects of the business that you might never have touched before, like I mean, I loved your spokesperson on TV, the Irish man that just created a face for iiNet. I was your customer right through that period, and how did you learn some of those just completely different disciplines? Did you have an instinct for it? Did you hire really skilled people on that front? Tell me about that.
We struggled with marketing people. I think, it's Perth as well. Perth has a bit of a head office, a branch office type position in Australia. Most people that are in senior marketing roles in Western Australia are branch offices for an actual brand that's owned out of the East Coast. But more than that, we felt the brand ought to be owned by the CEO, not by the marketing people.
Yes,
and
always.
I remember Vodafone, for instance, had their human resources team own the brand. And what part of that was that saying that, well, the culture of the business is what you try and project externally. Don't try and have this disconnect between the brand you're saying you are versus the one you are. And I think that was one of the things we tried to do with the first major advertising campaign. Was this chap Finn was the character name, but David Smythe was the actor, was to say we had this feeling if we could just get into the lounge room and tell everyone what we're about, sit down with people and say, look, we really care about this stuff. We hire service people and we have cool new products because we're excited and passionate about it, but we'll take care of you if things break. That was the whole brand promise, innovation and service. And if we could just communicate that, then people would want to be our customers. and we say, that look, we came from a small business background, and it's really important that even if we've got thousands of staff, we still act like a small business.
Yes.
So a message I used to always pump with people was, how would you have handled that call if that was your mum or your brother? Would you really have said there's nothing else I can do, or you haven't paid your bill, that's it? Or would you say, look, I'll find a way to get you through this? And just try and make sure that was in every interaction, which is hard, by the way. Treat this person like a family.
Really hard.
Then hang up the phone and do it again and again and again. And people, often the engineers, as I said before, often had to stay back and say, no, we've got to stay working until this gets up because this is really important.
Yeah.
And that's hard as businesses grow because the business becomes like a third party. I'm not screwing Michael, I'm screwing the company.
Yes.
And that's hard to maintain as the business grows, I think. And I'd like to think founder-led companies have a unique opportunity in doing that because the personality of the business, the values is not words on the wall. The personality of the business is the founder.
It's how you built it.
And people look around and say, how would I make that decision? It's often down to, where did we come from, that origin story, which I was a bit embarrassed about to start with, starting in the garage. We had this feeling of, we're not in the garage anymore, guys. But eventually we learned to embrace it. It was a really important part of our culture.
Yeah.
So, I think that the advertising campaign, David we felt we had a unique position in the market where our major competitors each had a position, but iiNet was the only one that could have a face on it. So, Telstra was the safe option and could be and should be, they have lifeline responsibility. So making sure the network was always up was really important. Optus at the moment, I think was, Australia, deserves a strong number 2 and Optus was not it. And TPG was price-led. So I thought iiNet had this opportunity to be the challenger, the brand that was going to try things a bit different and be a little bit better. And if we could just show people that, we'd win. And I think David ended up being that standout actor that was able to maintain that for us and be our face and our person.
Yeah, so gorgeous.
Very unusual for a face to last more than a few years. People stop hearing the message, and he's been 15 years now. It's amazing.
Yeah, he's just gorgeous. And obviously I'm not the only one who thinks so. More than 1 million customers. Tell me, you did leave before you got sort of the big exit to TPG. How did you decide to, how did you know it was time, and how did you run succession? Tell me about that time.
I think I like crises. I think that's my nature is so when things are broken, I'm get very excited. And I think everyone's on the same page when things are broken as well. There's no, there's not that the politics or the tensions that come with trying to build consensus. When things are broken, everyone wants to pitch in and fix it, right? And that's exciting. And launching new products and innovation is a lot like that as well. We ran through a major court case with the copyright, with all the movie studios suing us. This was an outside crisis brought in. These things were exciting and fun. Acquisitions as well are, a miniature crisis. When you acquire a company, that everything changes. So, but when we got to that point in, 2013, 2014, we'd done a couple of major acquisitions. We had a 3-year plan, which was, part of a 5-year plan, but 3-year targets, the long-term incentive plan. And honestly, in year 1, we'd nailed them. And I guess I'm of that cut from that cloth where if things aren't broken, I'm likely to break them myself. So I think at least having, it was a good discussion with the board, a tough discussion with the board, but sort of having that notion of this is actually the best time.
Yes.
I'm in my last, if anything, my last year there was probably not my best year because, it was, I kind of knew it was time. I think the board probably knew as well, even though they never pushed me at all. But I think it was that feeling of it's time to go, but what else would I do? And so it was less about knowing it was time to go and more of the fear of what's next.
What's next? Challenge. Yeah.
So the board got me to take a sabbatical, and by the time I came back, it was clear it was not. There was, it was time to move on, but it was tough. In terms of the succession process, look, we had probably 3 people within the company that could easily have taken over, and the board decided to make one of them acting, and then run a process. And the process ran for a few months. I'm not really a fan of that. I think if there's one of the people is a contender for the role, then it's better to put someone else in as acting. Because, having the interim person also going for the role creates some inevitable tensions.
Yes.
So I think in terms of good succession planning, it worked, I think, with iiNet. The person who was acting became the permanent CEO. But before he even got his feet under the table, the bid landed for the organization and to take us out. So that was unfortunate. But I think, certainly I think it's fair to say another couple of organizations I'm involved in where we put someone in who was not keen on taking the full-time role. And that person's able to sort of be the interim while the process runs its course and give up.
Switzerland.
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah. Interesting. So just very briefly, you've obviously had a really interesting career since leaving. How did you find that transition?
Well, I think you do start to fall in love with your own legend a little bit. So I thought I'd go off and do the same thing again. We just recently had our 30th anniversary of iiNet's founding, and a lot of the former staff came back. And I guess this was a common comment is we all thought that culture, I couldn't wait to get to work. I was at work every day before 7 a.m. These were my friends, my family. It was exciting. And we all thought that was normal because for most people, when we hired them out of hospitality and tourism, this was their first big full-time job inside a corporate. And you kind of realize afterwards, no, it's not normal. But I did think I'd go off and start another one or become perhaps, professional CEO somewhere else. So I did start a cybersecurity company and that did well. But, enterprise and government are a much tougher cycle than consumer. Yes. So it can take years to win a new customer. It's very lumpy. So we grew to 20 odd full-time staff and then exited that business in 2020. And it was a lot of fun, hiring ex-defense personnel in a sexy industry like cybersecurity. It was a lot of fun, but it's also hard to make money out of charging for people's time. Yes. And so it was a difficult business to scale up.
Much,
And I didn't intend to become a non-exec director. I was 46 when I left iiNet and thought that was probably a bit young to move to that stage. But I got a call within, I think the next day after my resignation was announced and thought, oh yeah, I'll give that a go. I can do one board, right? And still do all this other stuff. And then others came as well. And I love it. I really do. It's, I mentioned before, I like crises and, a good board hopefully tries to avoid the crises, but they're inevitable. And I think, having that opportunity to be able to step back and deal with the crisis and see, have we got the right plans in place? How do we deal with the current issue? Most crises, whether it's a cybersecurity incident or a human, a staff injury or death, or a customer facing issue. The processes are mainly about comms first. It's about how do we let everyone who needs to know immediately. How do we let them know what the problem is, what we're doing about it, what's when it's going to be fixed, but also how do we avoid this problem again?
Yes.
And I think, a lot of boards today are very concerned about cybersecurity, and it feels like black magic, of course, or AI, but they're very comfortable with safety. And safety is also a dark art with, the number of different ways we can hurt a staff member is always expanding. But boards seem very comfortable with using a risk-based assessment for that and putting in place the right processes and mitigating them. And we need to do the same sort of approach with those more arcane areas as well, like cybersecurity and AI.
Yeah.
But I really enjoy it. Intellectually, it's very interesting. I'm a micro person, so the discipline of being able to step back and sort of try and look at this stuff at a high level, longer term, is a real challenge for a former CEO founder. But there's a never ending. Every month there's something utterly different that you've never thought about before.
Yeah. I say to friends, I'm doing a portfolio of things these days too. And I say to friends, it keeps my brain plastic. It's like, diving into different businesses. It's like, whoa, like, right.
And they're rapid. I mean, technology is rapidly moving, right? But and every founder-led business is utterly different. The personality of the founder means that you can't necessarily take the lessons from the last one to the next one. And I've probably clashed with more founders than I've bonded with. Because it's so personal. It's like any relationship. Yes. But so it's not, you can't necessarily take that learning from the last one. I know I mentioned WiseTech. The best way to annoy the current CEO there, the founder, is to say, well, this is the way they've done it at the 14 other companies I've been involved in. He's got a saying, which is, that
wall goes up.
He's got a saying, different is not necessarily better, but better is always different. And there's a good deal of wisdom in that, that if you're going to be the best performer in the industry, then by definition, you can't do things the way everyone else does it. And, because then you're average. So I think that's a real challenge then to do that with each new company, is how we're going to do things here that put us in the top quartile always.
Yep. Beautiful. Gosh, that's a great quote, Michael. I love that. All right. Well, look, thank you so much for sharing your journey. I just learned so much from that conversation, and I'm sure others will. So thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Helen. It's very enjoyable.